Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be unpacking what's really behind the Christian faith pivot. Whether we're talking about Russell Brand or Nicki Minaj, there's a specific kind of silence that happens when a celebrity wraps themselves in the Bible. And today we're going to say the quiet part out loud. For decades, we've used pop culture to escape reality. Now, pop culture is being used to recode reality. We're seeing a repeatable blueprint where a personal crisis is converted into moral panic by using ignorance leverage, the ability to spread certainty where facts are hard to find. Vulnerable figures are recruiting their audiences into a spiritual war. It happened with Russell Brand, and it's happening now with Nicki Minaj. This isn't just about selling out or switching sides. It's about the weaponization of moral certainty to protect individual power. This is the anatomy of the strategic pivot. When Nicki Minaj began her recent pivot toward faith based politics and MAGA-coded rhetoric, the internet called it a crash out. But if you look at the mechanics, it looks more like a calibration. Between personal vulnerabilities and household legal baggage, the gravity pulling on her reputation reached a breaking point. In this video, we're unpacking the industrial complex of redemption. We'll explore how faith becomes a shield, selective outrage becomes a loyalty oath, and how pop culture is being used as a Trojan horse to deliver politics into places it usually can't reach. Today, we're going to look past the sensational headlines to see the cold structural logic of the celebrity redemption arc. Let's get ready for this. What both religion and politics have uncovered is that pop culture operates as a delivery system. A massive celebrity can work like a credibility delivery system for political ideas because they already have what politics desperately wants. A pop icon doesn't need a policy argument. They already have attention, emotional trust, status, and identity overlap. They have people who see them even when they weren't looking for politics, fans who feel like they really know them, and their approval makes their ideas feel less fringe. So when a celebrity signals a political side, it can lower people's skepticism before any facts are even discussed. When someone as big as Nicki Minaj signals alignment with faith or politics, it doesn't just stay in political spaces. It spills over into fan pages, into music blogs, entertainment news, reaction channels, and even group chats. That's the carrier effect. The politics rides on celebrity distribution. The credibility transfers through association. Even if someone disagrees, the association can still soften them. I hate this take, but she's not dumb. Or she's not one of them, she's one of us. Or maybe this isn't as extreme as some people say. Or why are people so mad at her? It's just an opinion. That's called the amplifier effect. The message borrows legitimacy because the messenger is culturally validated. Now, as it pertains to Nicki Minaj, we're not just talking about one tweet or one post. We're talking about a cluster of signals that feel like a consistent direction, including seeing Christian and pro Trump signaling from her, anti democratic framing, anti trans or anti progressive culture war posture, and even a wave of public rants against the Grammys, Trevor Noah, and Jay-Z and Beyonce. You put all of this together, and the takeaway that many people are landing on is that she's not just talking, she's choosing a side. Here's the uncomfortable truth: celebrity alignment is a known political tactic, and which celebrity matters. A high profile Black woman with Latino roots in pop culture can do something that the GOP has historically struggled to do consistently. She can reach Black and Latino audiences with less resistance. She can create social pressure for fence sitters and use faith language to reframe politics as values and not party. Now, this isn't random, it functions like an attempt to gain legitimacy. Now, from my perspective, none of this is random. It seems more like an attempt to gain legitimacy and trust in demographics where Republicans often struggle. When a culturally dominant celebrity appears to endorse MAGA coded ideas, their fame becomes the argument. Politics no longer has to win debates, it just has to ride the celebrity's credibility into the room. That lowers resistance, increases exposure, and normalizes alignment. And in a polarized era, that's especially powerful for any movement trying to expand its legitimacy beyond its usual base. Now let's talk about the ignorance leverage, or the accelerated velocity of terminological inexactitude. In other words, high confidence claims spread fast where people can't easily fact check. Some topics are built for misinformation because most of us can't verify the truth quickly or easily. So these are low knowledge zones, places where the average listener doesn't have direct access to reality, context, or primary sources. That happens when something is geographically distant, policy technical, or even morally heated and jargon heavy. When people don't have direct knowledge, certainty becomes persuasive because it feels simple. To verify claims, you need time, you need context, and media literacy. To share claims, all you need is a thumb. When someone talks like they actually know what they're talking about, people often assume that they do. And once moral framing is added, it's easily to shut down nuance. If a claim is packaged as protecting the kids or defending the Christians or not empowering evil, then disagreement can be painted as complicity instead of caution. Celebrities and the media ecosystems around them often become curators of realities for their fans. So their audience borrows the celebrity's confidence like it's actual evidence. So let's zoom in. Nicki makes the claim that Christians are being persecuted in Nigeria, with Trump framed as paying attention and doing something about that persecution. Now, the point here isn't that persecution never happens. The point is the rhetorical advantage. Most people can't quickly verify what's happening in Nigeria without real study. And Nigeria's conflicts are complicated: religion, regional politics, militant groups, state capacity, land and resource disputes, and the complications of local histories. A sentence like persecuted Christians can be partly true, but still selective and incomplete. So the reliability question becomes: is Nikki speaking from grounded knowledge, or is she repeating a packaged narrative that travels well online? And that framing turns a complex situation into a loyalty test. Are you for persecuted Christians and ideally for Trump, or are you ignoring them? Now, disagreement can be framed as heartlessness, even when there's not enough information to know what you're agreeing to. Nikki doesn't stop with claims about Nigeria. She also has some pretty interesting claims about the Democrat Party. Her messaging lately has been very anti Democrat, using terminology such as demoncrat, urging Christians and the Pride community not to vote Democrat. Now, to be absolutely clear, I am not encouraging anyone to vote one way or another. We're just dealing with Nikki right now. Politics is a low knowledge zone just as much as Nigeria is. Platforms are huge, voting is multi issue, outcomes are messy, and most people don't actually read primary sources. So the simplified version often wins. Any Christian who votes Democrat is a fool. LGBTQ plus people should stop supporting the Democrats. That isn't an analysis, that's identity command messaging. You don't reason your way there, you're told what your identity requires. And Democrats is the ultimate shortcut. It collapses policy disagreement into spiritual evil. It bypasses trade offs and forces a binary. So the mechanism here is simple: complex civic reality gets turned into a one step moral performance. We've also seen her claims shift into the territory of trans issues as well. This is another low knowledge zone. The topic is tailor made for ignorance leverage because it's emotionally charged. Most people don't know the medical, psychological, sociological, and legal distinctions. And social media tends to collapse everything into for kids versus against kids. So high confidence talking points spread as common sense, or protect the children, or the left has lost their marbles, or boys, please be boys. And once it's framed that way, nuance sounds like excuse making, and careful explanation can't keep up with viral certainty. The real point is that this isn't only about whether a celebrity is right or wrong, it's about how the messaging moves. Confidence starts replacing knowledge. And because these topics are hard to verify, the claims spread as certainty, not as arguments. When this works, it does three things: it builds a ready made worldview. This is really what's going on, and we already know. It creates in group pressure. If you're one of us, you'd agree. What else do you need to see? And it reassigns trust away from evidence and institutions and towards celebrity plus aligned political brand. That's the mechanism. Where knowledge is thin, confidence becomes a weapon, and the internet rewards the people who wield it best. My kung fu is strong. Now, let me stop. Now, this is a perfect segue into talking about the misinformation vector. This is one of the most important moves in the whole framework. A messy reality full of mixed causes, trade offs, and unknowns get compressed into a clean moral story with obvious heroes and villains. And it becomes misinformation even when some of the facts are true, because selective framing can create a conclusion that feels certain while the real situation is still complicated. In other words, it's not only lies that mislead, sometimes it's simplification that feels like the truth. When moral certainty is being manufactured, you usually see compression, moralization, identity binding, demonization, and urgency. Compression, where many variables get locked up in one sentence. Moralization is when everything gets a right and wrong value attached to it. Identity binding is if you were truly one of us, insert label, you'd automatically share this viewpoint. Then there's, of course, the demonization, which I speak against as much as I can. And that's where disagreement becomes wickedness, not just difference, wicked. And then, of course, urgency, where now, because this is happening, you must do something now. And now the desire to protect, fight, or expose outruns careful context or consideration, which we're seeing a lot of that from all sides right now. But it spreads because certainty feels safer than complexity, especially online. Going back to Nigeria, Nigeria is a high complexity environment. You have religion, region, militia violence, state capacity, local politics, land resource disputes, and historical grievances to consider. But the narrative selects one emotionally powerful idea: Christians are persecuted, and turns it into the whole story. That creates a simple moral pipeline. Christians are being slaughtered. If you don't center this, you're complicit. And whoever screams it the loudest is the most righteous. That's why it functions as a misinformation vector, even without a clean lie, because collapsing the country into one moral storyline can create false certainty about what's causing the violence, what the solutions are, who deserves trust, and who gets to be assigned good or evil, all without doing the work of actually understanding what's happening. What we're seeing with the trans rhetoric is the same compression move, but with even more viral fuel. You see the child protection trigger, the disgust language being used, such as degenerate or corrupt. And you also see the binary moral sorting, good parenting versus evil ideology. So, a complex conversation around policy, around medical needs, and around ethical needs gets shortcut into this is obviously wrong, and anyone tolerating it is corrupt. And once that happens, context becomes socially suspicious. That's why it's such a powerful misinformation vector. The frame is built so that nuance sounds like excuse making. The moment you add complexity, people don't hear more accuracy, they hear, why are you defending harm? That's how moral certainty blocks verification. And then actually moving into the demonization by calling the Democrats demonic. This is the most extreme form of the move because it doesn't just claim that their policies are bad or that their outcomes are harmful. It claims that their nature is evil. And once politics becomes spiritual warfare, you don't need evidence, you just need loyalty. Now, that shift turns policy disagreement into moral contamination. And that's why it's so rhetorically effective. Any rebuttal can be framed as siding with evil. This isn't just a list of bad takes, it's a pattern. Celebrity messaging compresses complex realities into moral binaries that produces instant certainty. That certainty is contagious because it's emotionally satisfying, identity affirming, and easier to share than context. So the danger isn't only misinformation as false facts. The danger is misinformation as clean stories that override complexity. And here's the point for all of us to remember: when a claim is framed so that disagreement equals evil, you left information and entered control. So now that we've unpacked the messaging a little bit, let's talk about how this viral talk turns into moral panic. This is the moment when online discourse stops being a hot take and becomes an ultimate evil story. It's no longer they're wrong or they're corrupt, but now it's they're monstrous. Once content reaches that level, it spreads fast because panic travels faster than nuance. Now, before anybody tries to come for me for being biased, please remember that I have called this out just as much in the secular community as I am highlighting it in the religious community. When sensationalization kicks in, you'll see a familiar set of features: high severity, high certainty, low verifiability, high urgency, and systemic framing. It's no longer merely bad, it's now unthinkable evil. It's now presented as obvious and known, even though you're nowhere near the details or the context. The main effect of this is simple: nuance becomes socially expensive. People feel like hesitation equals complicity. So, what does this part have to do with Nicki Minaj? One of the strongest panic accelerators is this move: pick a famous target and attach the most emotionally radioactive accusation class possible, especially anything involving harm to children. That's why claims framed as child trafficking or child sacrifice are so powerful as sensational content. Once those words enter the conversation, a lot of people stop asking, "Is this true?" and start asking, "What do we do about it?" Because in the audience's mind, the stakes become too high to wait. This is where the narrative moves from maybe corruption to metaphysical wickedness. Satanic cult framing doesn't just accuse someone of wrongdoing, it implies that there are hidden networks, spiritual warfare, secret ceremonies, and unfathomable depravity. And I'm not saying there isn't, but it spreads because it's vivid, identity coded, unfalsifiable, and is perfect for connect the dots type of engagement. That's how panic narrative becomes truer than proof. The story feels more real than verification. And once the ultimate evil accusation is in the air, it gets fused to voter sorting language. The message becomes believe this and you're a good person, doubt this and you're blind or you're complicit. Vote the wrong way and you've just joined evil. Now it's no longer conspiracy talk, it's identity discipline. This is what sensationalization does. Viral discourse escalates by attaching ultimate evil claims to named enemies and institutions. That escalation produces moral panic, instant certainty, urgency, and identity sorting, where skepticism gets treated as complicity and nuance is overridden. Now, once content reaches that point, the goal stops being truth, the goal becomes mobilization through fear, which leads us into submission outcomes. Now, this is about people being pressured into compliance, or at least silence, because the message is wrapped in moral and spiritual language. Once a claim is framed as moral, spiritual, or identity bound, then disagreement stops looking like feedback. It becomes easy to label dissent as hostility, persecution, siding with evil, or attacking the messenger. So credibility becomes socially protected, not logically earned. Once messaging becomes moral or spiritual, supporters often feel obligated to defend the speaker, punish dissent, shame neutrality, and demand loyalty signals. We're seeing a lot of that lately. That produces the submission outcome. People comply or stay quiet to avoid social or perceived spiritual consequences. And what contributes to that is that now any type of criticism is framed as persecution or oppression. So criticism becomes censorship, accountability becomes attack, and disagreement becomes oppression. Instead of engaging the critique, the speaker centers their suffering. Look what they're doing to me for telling the truth. And that works because it redirects the audience's energy away from checking the claim and toward defending the person. And so then in this context, any form of rebuttal gets reframed as retaliation, which of course proves that the person spreading the claim is correct. Once that frame is accepted, reaction replaces evidence completely. That's why this produces submission. Question becomes aligning with evil, and loyalty becomes virtue. When credibility is protected by identity and emotional pressure, disagreement becomes social danger, not a normal part of truth seeking. So the loudest moral framing wins because it makes questioning feel like betrayal. Now, the insidious part here is that people aren't just persuaded to believe something, they're shaped into roles with social responsibility. Votes, shares, boycotts, pile ons, harassments, don't vote for them, expose them, protect kids, defend Christians, and the list goes on. Once people accept a moral frame, enemy making creates urgency, and urgency creates mobilization. especially when the tribe is tied to identity. This is where neutrality becomes so this is where neutrality becomes socially expensive. So let's zoom back in on Nicki Minaj. When Christianity and Trump are paired, it becomes a tribal consolidation cue. Christian identity brings moral authority plus community belonging. Trump functions as a tribal emblem. To be for or against him already divides people, and together they signal faith and power. It recruits through identity rather than knowledge. If you're Christian or culturally Christian, the implication is this is your lane, this is your fight. And once people see themselves as the righteous tribe, criticism becomes easier to recode as persecution, which strengthens loyalty and bonding. Anti progressive content, especially protect kids framing, works like a binary sorting machine. You either see the corruption or you're captured. You either protect the children or you're enabling harm. That turns complicated policy into a moral test. And moral tests are perfect for mobilization because they demand public signals, reward conformity, and punish nuance. The messaging is not designed to inform, it's designed to incite. Once the audience accepts the moral spiritual frame, the influencer shifts from messenger to mobilizer. All right, so we've been unpacking a little bit of the messaging and a little bit of the mechanics, but there's probably a bigger question on many people's minds, and that's why. Why would Nikki make this shift? Probably the same reason Russell Brand did. Let's call it incentive pressure. In the context of incentive pressure, personal vulnerability becomes an accelerant. Nicki Minaj is undocumented in a moment when deportations are accelerating and due process is being bypassed and weakened. When the threat is removal, the incentive isn't just to win arguments, it's to reduce danger, to become harder to target, harder to punish, and socially costly to come after. A public Christian turn functions as shield identity. It moves her from controversial celebrity to believer, a protected moral category in American culture. It recruits forgiveness scripts immediately. Grace, redemption, don't judge. Ooh, God is doing something. It raises the social price of criticism. Pushback can now be reframed as attacking faith instead of evaluating the facts, where the math just simply isn't mathing. So Christianity becomes more than theology here, it becomes moral cover. If Trump represents the political force tied to deportation escalation, then praising him functions as a proximity to power signal. That's not about policy literacy, it's about reducing perceived threat. Put together, it becomes a coherent survival move. Jesus creates moral protection, Trump creates political protection. Faith makes her harder to criticize, power alignment makes her harder to target. And once that shield is in place, criticism becomes persecution, disagreement becomes hostility, and the audience becomes an enforcement and defense network. That's the accelerant. Undocumented vulnerability doesn't just influence what she believes, it pressures what she signals publicly because the stakes aren't just reputation, the stakes are residency. The mechanism here is strategic asylum. When an individual's personal safety, status, or legal standing is threatened, they may perform a rapid ideological pivot to align with the dominant political power. This isn't just about faith, it's about acquiring a protective constituency. And this dynamic, Nikki's pivot to Jesus, comes off as a gateway to political protection. By adopting the religious and cultural markers of the ruling power, the individual transforms from a vulnerable outlier into a persecuted ally. The point I'm getting at is that vulnerability removes the luxury of neutrality. In a stable environment, a celebrity might stay apolitical or vaguely spiritual. In a high stakes environment where the state has the power to pin your life, becoming one of them is a survival strategy. Promotion of the faith and the politics becomes a public loyalty test. By loudly supporting the administration's core themes, she secures a grassroots Barbs to MAGA coalition that makes her a friend to the party. So, Darante, are you just suggesting that Nikki is publicly pretending to be a Christian just so that she's not at risk of deportation? I cannot say that for sure, but what I can say is that there are some consistency issues with her pivot. In this case, we can use selective moral outrage as a reliability indicator. A consistency test asks one question: does the speaker apply the same moral standards to their own side that they apply to their enemies? Because in these ecosystems, outrage often works asymmetrically. Enemies get the highest severity accusations, such as trafficking, ritual evil, and harm to children, while allies get moral cover. God can use anyone, they're flawed, but at least they're on the right side. Who are you to judge? When the worst accusations only land on enemies, outrage starts behaving like tribal weaponry. There's a clear mismatch in some of Nicki's praise. For example, on one hand, she has faith coded praise in alignment with Trump. On the other hand, she has maximum severity allegations aimed at Jay Z and Beyonce. This is the ultimate evil category that I was mentioning earlier. If protect the children is the moral ceiling, it should apply universally. But when the most extreme moral language is reserved for cultural enemies while political allies remain protected or sanitized, that selectivity signals motive. This isn't careful moral reasoning, it's strategic targeting. Because in moral panic systems, there's a known maneuver: keep the emotional fuel, swap the villain, force a binary, and then pull attention away from politically inconvenient associations on your side. Even if it isn't coordinated, the pivot works the same way. It redirects the moral spotlight. This kind of target substitution typically runs in a predictable sequence: anchor to the hottest fear object, introduce a pop culture villain, escalate the severity, and then demand side selection. The result is a crowd that stays locked in panic certainty, but now the villain is more tribally profitable. There's also the undertone of racial dog whistling here as well. And I'm flagging this as a real historical pattern. American moral panics have repeatedly cast black men, especially powerful black men, as predatory threats, corruptors of innocence, and secret criminal kingpins. So the concern isn't that every accusation is intentionally racist. The concern is that the effect becomes racialized if extreme child harm trafficking narratives cluster around Black cultural figures, while similarly situated allies receive moral softness or social exemption. That's how a scapegoat pivot can function like a dog whistle, not by naming race, but by activating old cultural scripts about who the real monster is. In moral panic ecosystems, credibility can be tested by consistency. When Trump praise coexists with maximal child harm accusations aimed at Jay Z and Beyonce, especially in a moment already saturated with Epstein trafficking discourse, it suggests the outrage is operating tribally. Not apply justice everywhere, but weaponize the worst accusations against the most useful enemy. Selective moral outrage reveals whether this is ethics or a targeting strategy. That selective outrage is a loyalty oath. By attacking the correct villains with the most extreme language available, the individual proves they are fully integrated into the tribal ecosystem. The inconsistency is the point. It shows that their loyalty to the group's war outweighs their commitments to the objective moral standards. The core mechanism here is villain substitution. In high stakes political environments, moral outrage functions as a currency. To remain in the good graces of the protective power structure, an individual must spend that currency against the right targets, the ones the power structure already views as enemies. We're not discussing this today because Nick is a unique situation. As a matter of fact, it's because it's not unique that we're discussing it. This is a repeatable transition pattern. When a celebrity's legitimacy is threatened, they often move from entertainment credibility to moral credibility, because moral credibility is easier to defend with loyalty than with evidence. When the public story turns hostile, whether it's scandal, allegations, career decline, platform conflict, a celebrity can easily reseat themselves in a new kind of authority. From "do you like my art" to "are you with me against the conspiracy?" That shift brings three major advantages. Number one, a new base with new rules. Number two, built in defense scripts. And number three, a ready made coalition. Because faith and culture war language taps a massive ecosystem that rewards combative certainty. Russell Brand is a clean example of how this transition works because the public timeline shows the elements that I'm describing. In late 2023, there were high profile investigations that alleged multiple counts of assault. Within months of the allegations, Brand publicly converted to Christianity and was baptized in the River Thames, framing his past as sin rather than crime. He then began framing the legal investigations not as due process, but as a coordinated media attack and spiritual warfare. By adopting the language of a born again believer, he forced his critics to fight on the terrain of redemption rather than the terrain of evidence. Even while facing the charges himself, he pivoted to promoting high trust conservative media like Tucker Carlson and reciting the Lord's Prayer with Jordan Peterson for some reason. Russell Brand successfully migrated his audience from left leaning seekers to right wing Christians, securing a base that views his legal troubles as political persecution. Mechanically, this move doesn't require anyone to prove sincerity or insincerity to be useful. It activates a forgiveness and a protection script. That's why the mechanism repeats. The pipeline isn't unique to one celebrity, it's a structural playbook for converting pop cultural attention into moral authority and turning that moral authority into protection, influence, and a more defensible base. The case of Russell Brand demonstrates that the shift from counterculture icon to faith based conservative is a predictable response to institutional pressure. Like Nicki, Brand's transition was accelerated by specific external threats that made aligning with the party of tradition a survival necessity. When we compare these pivots, a clear tactical signature emerges. Both figures had significant public baggage that made them vulnerable to standard secular accountability. Both moved away from secular or liberal spheres into religious and conservative spheres. Both successfully reframed personal accountability as an attack on their identity, effectively using the party in power as a shield. The Russell Brand case proves that religious conversion is the most effective way to achieve escape velocity, especially from a collapsing reputation. It allows an individual to declare their old self dead and their new self protected, provided they're willing to serve as a high profile mouthpiece for the political and religious structures that offer them asylum. If we zoom out, this isn't a story about one celebrity going political. It's a story about how modern influence works. Pop culture can carry politics into spaces where politics normally can't reach. And once the message gets inside those spaces, it doesn't need to be accurate. It just needs to be confident, moralized, and tribally useful. That's the spine we've mapped. Celebrity credibility gets used as a delivery system. Low knowledge zones gets exploited with high confidence certainty. Complex realities get compressed into clean moral binaries. The content escalates into panic narratives that override verification, and it repeats across figures because it's a playbook, not a personality quirk. So the real warning here isn't celebrity opinions are dangerous. The warning is this: when politics is carried through celebrity trust, it bypasses people's skepticism. When it's framed as spiritual warfare, it bypasses people's ethics. And when it becomes tribal duty, it bypasses people's thinking entirely. This isn't just misinformation, it's influence architecture designed to convert attention into certainty, certainty into loyalty, and loyalty into action. We see that the most effective political delivery systems don't use facts, they use moral certainty. By collapsing complex global issues or messy legal realities into good versus evil binaries, celebrities leverage the ignorance leverage of their audience. They aren't asking fans to think, they're asking them to submit to a narrative that protects the messenger. Ultimately, the celebrity functions as a political delivery system that can bypass the traditional immune system of the electorate. A political party may struggle to reach specific demographics, but a pop icon can carry those same political goals under the guise of faith and values. When a celebrity aligns with a power structure during a moment of personal crisis, we're not just watching a spiritual journey. We're watching the construction of a reputational fortress. Inside this fortress, facts are replaced by faith, critics are rebranded as demons, and the party in power provides the legal and social asylum necessary for survival. This allows us to look past the sensationalism of the headlines and see the underlying structural logic. In a world where attention is currency and loyalty is protection, the pivot to Jesus has become the ultimate high stakes survival move. Thank you for hanging around to the end. If deep dives like this are helping you find your way forward, here's how you can support the channel and continue to invest in your own growth at the same time. Head over to Windows Shop. It's built for people who don't just want hot takes, you want the tools. We've got dozens of study guide content packs that help you go deeper, sharpen your thinking, and build real world understanding you can carry into conversations, relationships, and real life. And if you want to rep what you're building, grab some channel merch. It keeps the lights on and makes the vision visible. Support isn't just donating, it's choosing to grow on purpose and bringing other people with you. So if you're rocking with this work, make sure to pick up a guide, grab some merch, share this video with someone who needs clarity, and make sure you're subscribed because we're not done. Window Shop is where support turns into strategy and where the channel becomes something you can actually use. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, keep rising.